Lydia Marell was the kind of woman everyone trusted, elegant, gentle, and endlessly patient with her husband, Evan Marell, a man with a fragile mind and a heart too pure for the world. But behind the soft smiles and kind gestures, Lydia was weaving a web of lies so dark that even she couldn't escape it. What began as manipulation for money soon spiraled into a horrifying game of deceit, disappearance, and survival, one that would end with the scariest twist no one saw coming. Lydia Marell had mastered the art of deception. To the residents of Willowbridge, she appeared to be the perfect wife, soft-spoken, elegant, and endlessly patient with her husband, Evan. The neighbors admired her devotion, often commenting on how lucky Evan was to have someone so loving by his side. Every morning, Lydia walked him to the small grocery store, where he liked to help arrange shelves for a few hours. His mild intellectual disability made him slow with understanding, but his gentle heart made everyone in town fond of him. Lydia would smile, wave to the store owner, and remind Evan to be careful crossing the street before returning home with her usual grace. It was a performance, carefully rehearsed and flawlessly executed. Behind closed doors, however, the kindness melted away. Lydia saw Evan not as a husband, but as a burden and, more importantly, as a bank account. Years ago, after the death of Evan's parents, he had inherited a large sum of money and valuable property. He never fully grasped the significance of what he owned, and Lydia used that ignorance to her advantage. When they married, she convinced him that she needed access to his finances to help manage things better. He had nodded, smiling in trust, and handed over every document she requested. From that moment on, she controlled everything: his accounts, his family home, even his medical decisions. The transformation in Lydia's lifestyle was immediate. Her old clothes were replaced with expensive brands, her modest car with a luxury sedan. She began traveling alone, claiming she was visiting family or attending wellness retreats. At social gatherings, she spoke of how difficult it was to care for someone like Evan, using his condition as a tool to gain sympathy. People comforted her, praising her strength, never realizing that the very man they pitied was being quietly neglected. Evan's world grew smaller by the day. Lydia stopped inviting friends over, claiming he became too anxious around strangers. She canceled his therapy sessions, saying they were too costly. Even though she spent lavishly on herself, his meals became simple and repetitive, his clothes worn and faded. He spent most days staring out the window, waiting for her to come home. Lydia, meanwhile, had begun something far darker. She contacted a financial advisor in secret, asking how to transfer large amounts of money discreetly. Her plan was unfolding perfectly, slow enough to avoid suspicion, but steady enough to drain Evan's inheritance. Yet there were cracks in her perfect performance. Dr. Riley Quinn, Evan's former psychologist, noticed his sudden absence and made repeated calls to check on him. Lydia always had excuses, but her tone grew defensive each time. A concerned neighbor mentioned once seeing Lydia shouting at Evan near the garage, her expression cold and frightening. The story spread quietly through the town, but no one dared to confront her. Still, beneath the calm surface of Lydia's carefully built life, something sinister was beginning to stir. She had achieved control, wealth, and freedom, but greed has a way of demanding more. And Lydia Marell was about to cross a line that would turn her carefully crafted lie into a nightmare she could no longer escape. Lydia Marell's hunger for control deepened as months passed. She had successfully built a world where every decision, every penny, and every breath of Evan's life depended on her. He no longer had access to his own bank account or personal belongings without her permission. She had changed passwords, redirected mail, and even removed his name from several property papers, replacing it with her own through carefully forged signatures. It was all hidden behind the facade of a loving wife who only wanted to protect her vulnerable husband. Evan's once bright spirit began to fade. His days blurred together in silence. Lydia had removed all the things that once brought him joy: his old radio, his art supplies, even the small notebook where he liked to write down simple thoughts. She claimed they cluttered the house, but the truth was simpler. She didn't want him remembering or expressing anything without her control. She rationed his medication, sometimes giving him less than prescribed, leaving him confused and lethargic. When he asked questions, she dismissed him with a sweet smile and told him to rest. To outsiders, Lydia appeared exhausted but devoted. She often told neighbors how hard it was caring for someone like Evan, her voice trembling just enough to sound genuine. They would offer sympathy, sometimes even helping with groceries or sending food. Lydia accepted their kindness while laughing behind their backs. Every act of pity toward her was another sign that she had convinced everyone of her false virtue. But not everyone believed her entirely. Dr. Riley Quinn, who had once treated Evan for anxiety and developmental difficulties, had grown uneasy. It wasn't just that Evan had stopped attending therapy. It was how abruptly it happened. Lydia's excuses never felt consistent. Sometimes she claimed Evan was doing better, other times that he didn't want to continue. Dr. Quinn, sensing something wrong, began documenting every call and message related to the Marells. She didn't know it yet, but that record would later become crucial evidence. Lydia's greed grew bolder with time. She started selling Evan's possessions, his parents' antiques, his father's watch collection, and even old family photographs, framing it as decluttering. The money from these sales went straight into her private accounts. She spent her evenings on her laptop, researching how to transfer funds overseas and browsing luxury properties abroad. It wasn't enough for her to live comfortably. She wanted escape, absolute freedom, far away from the man who had unknowingly funded her ambitions. Her control, however, began to border on cruelty. She no longer allowed Evan to leave the house without her. When he asked to visit the park or grocery store, she locked the doors and told him it was unsafe outside. The isolation began to affect his mind. He often sat alone for hours, murmuring to himself, trying to remember when he last saw anyone besides Lydia. Lydia believed she had everything under control. She was confident that no one would question her story or care enough to look deeper. But in her arrogance, she failed to notice the small details that would soon unravel everything: the neighbors' suspicious glance, the doctor's recorded notes, and the faint trail of financial irregularities that pointed directly back to her. What Lydia couldn't see yet was that every lie she told, every document she forged, was quietly building the case that would one day expose her completely. The morning Evan Marell was reported missing, the entire town of Willowbridge felt an uneasy chill. Lydia's trembling voice filled the police station as she explained that her husband had gone for his usual walk after dinner and never returned. She claimed she had searched the neighborhood all night, calling his name, fearing the worst. Her eyes were red from tears, her hands shaking, her performance flawless. The officers assured her they would do everything possible to find him. To the public, she was a heartbroken wife in despair. To herself, she was finally free. Detective Trent Walters was assigned to the case. A calm, observant man with years of experience. He had seen enough fabricated grief to recognize it when it appeared. From the moment he met Lydia, he sensed something was off. Her sadness seemed rehearsed, her details inconsistent. She spoke of Evan's disappearance as though it were an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. Still, Walters kept his suspicions quiet, choosing to let evidence lead him where emotion could not. The first red flag came from surveillance footage. Lydia had told police she was home the entire evening after Evan's disappearance, but traffic cameras captured her car leaving the house at 11:40 p.m. and returning just before sunrise. When questioned, she claimed she had been searching the nearby roads for Evan, but her explanation lacked sincerity. Walters noted the lie and ordered a full analysis of her vehicle. Meanwhile, volunteers combed through fields, riversides, and forested areas near the Marell home. Flyers were pinned to street lamps, social media posts circulated, and news reporters gathered outside Lydia's house. She embraced the attention, crying for the cameras, begging anyone who might have seen her husband to come forward. The performance earned sympathy from the community once again, and soon she was the center of every headline. Devoted wife pleads for missing husband's safe return. Behind the scenes, though, Detective Walters was piecing together a different story. Financial records showed a series of suspicious transactions made in the weeks leading up to Evan's disappearance. Lydia had sold his late parents' house, transferred large sums into offshore accounts, and taken out a new life insurance policy in Evan's name. Effective only days before he went missing, the pieces fit together to neatly. Then came the testimony from Dr. Riley Quinn. She reached out to the police after learning of Evan's disappearance, explaining how Lydia had abruptly ended his therapy and avoided all contact since. Dr. Quinn's unease gave Walters the confirmation he needed. This wasn't a simple missing person case. Something much darker was unfolding. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Lydia's home. They found freshly cleaned floors, a recently replaced section of carpet, and faint traces of blood near the back door, diluted to identify, but enough to raise alarm. Lydia maintained her composure, claiming she had cut herself while cleaning. For weeks, there was no sign of Evan. Lydia's tears began to fade as the public's attention shifted elsewhere, and she felt her confidence return. She believed she had buried her secret forever, but what she didn't know was that a small, overlooked clue hidden deep within her own home would soon lead detectives to the truth and to the horrifying place where her lies would begin to collapse. The breakthrough in the case came on a cold afternoon when a local hiker named Marcia Doone stumbled upon something unusual in the dense woods near Willowbridge. A torn piece of fabric caught her eye, faded blue, like a man's shirt. When she brushed aside the leaves, she discovered a large, half-buried suitcase covered in dirt and moss. The zipper was rusted, and the smell that rose when it was opened was sharp and chemical. Inside were several neatly folded clothes, Evan Marell's wallet, his prescription medication, and a collection of personal documents that included his birth certificate and medical records. It looked less like someone had packed for a trip and more like someone had been erased. The police sealed off the area within hours. Detective Trent Walters arrived at the scene, his instincts confirming what he had suspected all along. Lydia Marell's story was falling apart. The contents of the suitcase were photographed and catalogued. Forensics later revealed faint fingerprints belonging to Lydia on the plastic bags that contained Evan's medication. The most chilling discovery, however, was the blood residue found on the suitcase lining. It was a match to Evan. With this evidence in hand, Walters confronted Lydia. She remained eerily calm, her expression more irritated than frightened. She told the detectives that she had no idea how Evan's belongings ended up in the woods, and suggested that someone was trying to frame her. Her tone was confident, almost mocking. Still, the evidence was undeniable, and Walters knew it was time to search deeper. A search warrant was issued for the Marell residence once again, this time focusing on hidden spaces that might have been missed earlier. Officers combed through every inch of the property, the garage, the attic, even the crawl space beneath the floorboards. In the attic, tucked behind a wall of old boxes, they found a locked chest. Inside were Evan's childhood keepsakes, photographs, small toys, a folded drawing labeled "My Family," and a stack of legal documents. At first glance, they appeared harmless, but closer inspection revealed something disturbing. The documents had been forged signatures, dates, and stamps falsified to make it appear as though Evan had willingly transferred all property and assets to Lydia. Each paper was carefully done, but the patterns of handwriting were inconsistent, clearly written by someone trying to mimic Evan's childlike penmanship. It was a quiet, deliberate fraud that had taken months to complete. When presented with this discovery, Lydia maintained her story, feigning shock and claiming she had never seen those papers before. But her composure began to waver when the forensic team matched ink traces on the forgeries to pens found on her desk. The evidence was overwhelming, yet Lydia still managed to delay arrest by cooperating just enough to buy time. One night, before police could detain her, she vanished. Her phone was found discarded in a trash bin behind a gas station. Her car was discovered 2 towns away, doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition. For days, search teams scoured nearby motels, bus stations, and rest stops, but she was gone without a trace. The once pitied wife had become a fugitive. The media erupted with headlines painting Lydia as a cunning mastermind. The town of Willowbridge was left in shock, realizing the woman they had admired had deceived them all. But what no one expected was that the story was far from over, because somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the investigation, a new clue was waiting to surface, one that would reveal the darkest and most unexpected twist of all. Months passed after Lydia Marell's disappearance, and the investigation began to lose momentum. The media had moved on to new stories, and the police had little more than faint leads and dead ends. It seemed that Lydia had vanished completely, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a husband presumed dead. But then, on a foggy morning in a small town nearly 80 miles away, a call came in that changed everything. A care facility reported that a man had been admitted under the name Edward Martin, brought in by a passerby who found him wandering aimlessly near the outskirts of town. The man was frail, confused, and terrified. When staff saw his photo on a missing persons bulletin, they realized it was Evan Marell. Detective Trent Walters arrived within hours. What he saw was haunting. Evan sat in a wheelchair by the window, his hands trembling, his eyes distant. He was thinner, weaker, and barely recognizable. He spoke very little, his voice cracked and hesitant, but when shown photos of Lydia, his entire body tensed and tears began to fall silently down his face. It was clear that he had endured something far more horrific than anyone had imagined. Through weeks of medical care and therapy, fragments of Evan's memory began to return. With each session, more of the nightmare unfolded. He recalled Lydia driving him late at night to an old, isolated farmhouse. She had given him what she called sleeping medicine, and everything had gone dark. When he woke, he was alone on a cold floor, surrounded by dust and broken furniture. He had been locked inside. He remembered the sound of Lydia's footsteps fading away and the faint click of a door being bolted shut from the outside. She had left him there to die. For days, Evan had drifted in and out of consciousness, surviving only on rainwater leaking through the roof. Eventually, weak but determined, he managed to push open a loose window and crawl out. Disoriented and injured, he wandered aimlessly through fields until he collapsed near a roadside where a driver found him and brought him to safety. He had no identification, no memory of who he was, and no idea that his wife had already declared him missing and was preparing to claim his insurance payout. When investigators followed Evan's account, they discovered the abandoned farmhouse he described. Inside, they found traces of his blood, an empty vial with residue of a sedative, and torn pieces of rope. Everything aligned with his story. The evidence, combined with the forged documents and financial transfers, painted a complete picture of Lydia's cruelty. A nationwide alert was issued, and 2 weeks later, she was found living under a false identity in another state, working at a luxury spa and posing as a widow named Lena Marks. Her arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. She didn't resist, didn't cry, didn't even ask what she was being charged with. When detectives placed the handcuffs on her wrists, she simply stared into the distance as if the reality she had built had finally collapsed. In court, Evan appeared only once. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for him: the forged papers, the abandoned farmhouse, the financial records, the suitcase in the woods. Lydia Marell was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. The story shocked everyone who had once admired her. To the world, she had been a model wife. But beneath that perfect image lived a woman driven by greed, deception, and cruelty. Yet the greatest twist was not her crime, but Evan's survival. The man she tried to erase became the living proof of her evil. And as he slowly rebuilt his life, one truth lingered in everyone's mind. Sometimes, the scariest twist isn't death, it's when the truth rises from the very place it was meant to disappear forever.